Many anthropologists, including Adrian Zillman, think the aquatic ape theory makes too much of this.
Where humans deposit their fat is where all other mammals deposit their fat, including monkeys and apes. What's different about humans compared to other primates is that we have slightly more body fat, but we have it exactly in the same places and have the same pattern.
The difference in the amount of fat may be slight in human adults, but in babies it's marked. Unlike all other primates, which are born with almost no body fat, human babies are born with plenty of it.
Fat is a specific evolutionary development. It's not just a punishment for eating too much. A human child spends longer in the womb than a chimp does, and the whole of the last month is spent accumulating fat. And after it's born, it gets fatter and fatter and fatter for the whole of its first 12 months on Earth. There must be some good reason for this.
And Elaine Morgan thinks there is. Fat does something more than insulate. It provides buoyancy. And if we did have an aquatic past, this ability to float with ease may be the reason for all that baby fat. There's another odd thing about humans: breath control. For land mammals, the lungs pump the way the heart beats, unconsciously. But humans, like aquatic mammals, can make this process conscious if they want to. They can estimate how much breath is needed for a dive and how long they need to hold it. That makes humans able to do what no other primate can: control precisely the flow of air over a voice box. So a former life in the water could even explain the evolution of language. Humans stand up and they speak. In the mid-1980s, Elaine Morgan finally made an inroad into the academic world by getting a series of articles published in reputable scientific magazines. She couldn't be entirely ignored now, but agreed with? Not widely.
It's a bizarre idea. There's a problem with the hypothesis because I think that the aquatic ape brings up in people's mind the idea of apes dog paddling around in lakes or in oceans. And that this is a very bizarre adaptation. And there isn't any evidence, to my mind, in the fossil record that would support an adaptation like this.
For fossil specialists such as Lee Berger, the arguments weren't even scientific.
The problem with the aquatic ape hypothesis is the way it's argued. We scientists are always going to be the bad guys in this one. We're arguing against people who are almost pursuing this as if it's a religion. If we say it's not, well, it's a scientific conspiracy. If we tell you that the morphology of the bones are not suitable for exhibiting any ancestry of an aquatic organism, well, it's a scientific conspiracy. We're not open to new ideas. It's not that good of an idea. It's not based on testable scientific philosophy.
Elaine was looking at the fossil evidence, though, just from a different angle. She saw bones that enabled an animal to stand up, a wading ape that could walk on two legs in water or on land. There are nearly 200 species of monkeys and apes in the world, and only one habitually, exclusively, walks upright. Why? What's the advantage?
Walking bipedally does make you much more slow and much more awkward. It means that you're more susceptible to predation because you don't have the speed and agility of a quadruped. It also means that you're relying on only two limbs to support your body mass where you used to rely on four. This increases the load on your hind limbs. It makes you more prone to injury. It makes your skeleton more prone to degradation. In general, it's just a very, very poor way of locomoting.
Scientists did have their own explanations, almost all linked to the climatic change that pushed our ancestors out from the forest and into the savanna. One early suggestion was that by standing upright, our ancestors could look high above the grass in search of potential predators, as many savanna animals do. But it's still much faster to run on four legs. Or maybe the upright posture is the result of reaching for food in the low savanna trees. Or even better, by having their hands free, these ape-like ancestors could then carry more food home to feed mates and children. A more recent explanation is that standing upright evolved as a cooling strategy. Less of the body is exposed to the overhead rays of the midday sun. And there's another way that standing tall keeps you cool. Savanna physiologist Peter Wheeler demonstrates his theory.
I've just set up two identical temperature sensors here. The one on the left has been placed close to the ground surface in the shade, and the right-hand one some 6 feet above it in this small acacia bush, also in the shade. And as we can see, there's some considerable difference in the readings of the two sensors. The one near the ground is reaching temperatures of almost 20 degrees centigrade higher than the more elevated one. What bipedalism is doing is it's moving more of the body surfaces further away from that hot ground and placing them in these cooler and faster moving airstreams where more heat will be carried away from the body by the process of convection.
So, according to Wheeler, by standing up, we kept cool. These explanations clearly dealt with the advantages of life in the savannah, but there were also drawbacks.
It's not only the uprightness, there are all these other things like the nature of our sweat glands, the nature of our perspiration, the chemistry of it. All of these strange, odd things which you wouldn't give a sniff to normally could indeed be valuable pointers to a kind of aquatic component in human evolution.
If our ancestors did move from forest to savanna, they needed to adapt to a hot, dry, exposed environment. Yet humans need to drink far more than any savanna animal. We also sweat far more than any savanna animal. We produce dilute urine, and we die quickly if we overheat. All these qualities contrast strongly with every other savanna animal. In 1990, Elaine brought the story up to date once more. And then, while the search for fossil bones continued, there came another dramatic twist to the story. Scientists looking at fossil plants found alongside the bones of South African ape men uncovered startling new evidence. It showed that at the time our ancestors were supposed to have first stood up, they lived in wooded and even forested habitats, not in the savannah. Much of what savannah supporters had based their ideas on would now need to be reassessed.
I was brought up on the idea that savannah was the ideal background within which uprightness emerged for the first time on the planet among the primates who became us. And it was a fixed idea for decades. Now it seems that that idea is just not correct.
The main counter-argument to the aquatic ape theory that humankind was born in the savannah was losing support.
This was a tremendous boost for the aquatic theory because there is nothing else really taking its place. The only theories they are talking about now is that perhaps when the apes were crossing the open spaces between one clump of trees and another clump of trees, perhaps that caused them to be different. That's only a watered-down version of the savannah theory. The savannah theory is dead. You've got to get something to put in its place, and the aquatic ape theory is the only game in town.
If one testable scientific hypothesis, like the savannah hypothesis, is out the window, because we found provable evidence that these ape men lived in forested environments, that doesn't have any relationship to the aquatic ape hypothesis.
Being the only explanation around didn't make it right. If she was to be taken seriously, Elaine Morgan had to meet the scientists head-on and present her arguments in their language. The internet put scientists all over the world into instant touch with each other, and the aquatic ape was one subject that could be relied upon to provoke fierce debate.
What I learned from the internet was I could gather all the little objections they had been raising behind closed doors that I hadn't known about, and I thought I will write a new book. I will jack up my scholarship, I will agree with their specifications, I will answer their objections, and I will bring it all up to date, and this time perhaps they will take it seriously.
The result was her latest book, published in 1997 in Elaine Morgan's 77th year. And then, a few months later, a breakthrough. An invitation to South Africa's Sun City resort to speak at an international scientific conference on human origins. All the world's experts on human evolution would be there.
It's very exciting. I think it's very gratifying to have even a toehold in a conference this size, and it'll be a thrill to see many of the people whose books I have read, see them in the flesh and see what they look like. I doubt if there'll be much head-to-head argument, but at least my voice will have been heard, I hope.
After all Elaine Morgan had written about Africa and its fossil sites, this was her first visit to either. She went on a conference day trip to see firsthand the labors of the fossil hunters. She touched the bones of our past and discovered how much the rest of the world knew of her ideas.
I think there is a lady who insists that the ancestor of the humans was in the water.
Yes, that's me.
You? You are the... Yes.
And then, after 30 years of studying the evidence from afar, Elaine Morgan now walked in the footsteps of the celebrated fossil hunters.
It's amazing how they recognized its significance, and that little hole that they must have gone down from before it got chipped away. Some guts.
Back at Sun City, Elaine needed to summon her own courage as the moment to present her ideas came. 30 years of rejection, and now, finally, she had the stage.
Ladies and gentlemen, it was in 1960 that Professor Alistair Hardy first put forward his ideas on human evolution. He suggested that there might have been an aquatic phase in human evolution, or semi-aquatic, at the time when we split from the apes, and that this might explain why we are so different from them.
This was the beginnings of acceptance. The talk was, of course, controversial, and the debate lively.
Undoubtedly of ignorance, I cannot figure out a way of testing it.
No, I think that the aquatic theory is no more accessible to testing and finding definite...
You know that there are two ways that ideas are treated in science in general. If you don't like a new idea, and nobody liked the aquatic ape theory when Sir Alistair Hardy put it forward. They thought it was a bit of a crackpot, harebrained sort of notion. You either vehemently oppose it, or you just ignore it, as though nobody had ever said it.
The promotion of the idea often wastes a great number of resources, maybe takes bright young future scientists in a different direction by giving it some validity. I know that sounds harsh, but it's not intended to be as harsh as it sounds. It's just that there are so many good questions, so many important questions, so many scientific questions, and I'm not sure that this is one of them that's worth wasting those resources on.
But a growing number of scientists now believe the aquatic ape idea does raise important questions. Questions that may be answered not by looking at the bones of fossils or the biology of our bodies, but in the food we once ate.
Homo sapiens evolved this large brain because he found an ecological niche. He found an environment where he could get at these essential nutrients. He found the lake shores, he found the sea, he found the estuaries, where the brain evolved right at the very first beginning in the marine environment. And we still owe a debt of gratitude in terms of its chemistry to that environment. Homo sapiens found that.
The only other mammals with brains as large and sophisticated as ours are marine mammals. What does that say about the marine mammal's diet? Do you need a large brain to exploit seafood, or does seafood give you a large brain?
We had a pre-existing capacity for intelligence being primates, and some of our ancestors managed to stumble upon mussels and fish, and in the Rift Valley you can catch fish by hand by spears. They get stranded during the end of the rainy season. It's very easy to make use of these resources. We stumbled upon it when we weren't smart enough to know how to hunt or fish or do anything. Ate enough of these essential fatty acids, got our brains a little bigger so we could say, hey, this is a good idea, let's do it again and again and again. Enough generations do it, enough infants are born with the brain capacity passed on through the mother that we can evolve very, very quickly to be intelligent and basically leave the Australopithecines behind.
So early humans were somehow intimate with water. They either used the life in it or were part of the life in it. As time has passed, Elaine Morgan has been vindicated. She hasn't been proved right. She isn't even supported by a majority of anthropologists. But she's recognized, and her ideas are sparking other ideas.
I see Elaine Morgan, through her series of superbly written books, presenting a challenge to the scientists to take an interest in this thing, to look at the evidence dispassionately, not to avert your gaze as though it was something that you hadn't ought to hear about or hadn't ought to see. And those who are honest with themselves are going to dispassionately examine the evidence. We've got to, if we're going to be true to our calling as scientists.
There has been a polarization of ideas. Elaine Morgan and certain others have sought for every scrap of evidence they could find to support the aquatic theory. Some of the more conservative anthropologists have searched for every scrap of information they can find to destroy that theory. And so instead of having a balanced judgment, what you've got is a counsel for the defense and a counsel for the prosecution.
I think that people going in for science today do it because they love it. They wouldn't be going into it for the money. They hope they've got something to contribute, and they are afraid that they would lessen their chances of contributing if they openly supported a crackpot heresy like this. They may be right. I would not advise anybody to lay their careers on the line over this issue. If it is sound, it will prevail anyway, and if it's not sound, it doesn't deserve to. Thank you very much.
Elaine Morgan may not be putting her career on the line, but in her 30-year pursuit of the truth, she has taken an idea that was on the far edge of science and pushed it into the spotlight. She has looked at the research into the human body as much as at the studies of the long-dead bones, and has come to some of her conclusions simply because they made sense. Did humanity rise out of water? It has to be considered. magazines. She couldn't be entirely ignored now, but agreed with? Not widely.
It's a bizarre idea. There's a problem with the hypothesis because I think that the aquatic ape brings up in people's mind the idea of apes dog paddling around in lakes or in oceans. And this is a very bizarre adaptation. And there isn't any evidence, to my mind, in the fossil record that would support an adaptation like this.
For fossil specialists such as Lieber provides buoyancy. And if we did have an aquatic past, this ability to float with ease may be the reason for all that baby fat. There's another odd thing about humans, breath control. For land mammals, the lungs pump the way the heart beats, unconsciously. But humans, like aquatic mammals, can make this process conscious if they want to. They can estimate how much breath is needed for a dive, and how long they need to hold it. Many anthropologists, including Adrian Zillman, think the aquatic ape theory makes too much of this.
Where humans deposit their fat is where all other mammals deposit their fat, including monkeys and apes. What's different about humans compared to other primates is that we have slightly more body fat, but we have it exactly in the same places and have the same pattern.
The difference in the amount of fat may be slight in human adults, but in babies, that makes humans able to do what no other primate can, control precisely the flow of air over a voice box. So a former life in the water could even explain the evolution of language. Humans stand up and they speak. In the mid-1980s, Elaine Morgan finally made an inroad into the academic world by getting a series of articles published in reputable scientific magazines. It's marked. Unlike all other primates, which are born with almost no body fat, human babies are born with plenty of it.
Fat is a specific evolutionary development. It's not just a punishment for eating too much. A human child spends longer in the womb than a chimp does, and the whole of the last month is spent accumulating fat. And after it's born, it gets fatter and fatter and fatter for the whole of its first 12 months on Earth. There must be some good reason for this.
And Elaine Morgan thinks there is. Fat does something more than insulate.